Hello to you newcomers and welcome back, my lovely subscribers, to the Galactic Armory. It's another great day to be a Star Wars fan, guys. Today I've got the Battlefront 2 Umbra ARC Trooper for you guys. I'm going to show you how you can make your own from the ground up or from the 3D printed parts. So let's get right into it. So if you're new here, I should tell you, all of my helmets are going to be 3D printed. Now, if you don't have a 3D printer, or if 3D printing is not really of an interest to you, check out the timestamp in the description to skip ahead to the physical parts. Now, I do also sell the physical parts in my shop, so if you want to complete this project while also help supporting the channel, be sure and check that out. Link will be in the description. Now, the files that we're going to be using for this helmet come directly from my shop. You can find them at galacticarmory.net under the 3D files section. So if you want the files for this project, this is where you're going to find them. Once we have the files, we can load them into our slicer and prepare them for printing. The first thing we're going to need to do is load up the helmet in Mesh Mixer. Now this helmet's a little bit too big to print in one piece, so what we can do is slice the helmet into a few major parts and then print them individually, and then assemble them after they've been printed. So once you have your helmet in Mesh Mixer, we're going to need to level it out a little bit. So just go to Transform, and here we can rotate the helmet a little bit. We're trying to make it as flat as possible so that we can cut it as flat as possible. So once you feel like you have it pretty flat, go to Plane Cut. Now this is what's actually going to slice our helmet, so we can move the little arrow to where we want that slice to be. Be sure and select the Keep Both cut type so that it doesn't discard half of the helmet. Now once you hit Accept, it looks like it doesn't do anything, but when we go to Separate Shells, you can see that it's split it out into two parts for us. Now we'll need to do the same thing with the face. We'll just adjust the cut a little bit, and I like to put it somewhere inconspicuous since these seams can be kind of hard to hide in the future. So just pick a spot that many people don't really look at too much. I went for directly behind the ear. So then that we've got our pieces all separated, we can export them and import the pieces into our slicer. So here you can see we've got just the face. This is going to fit a lot better on our build plate. Now if you guys have a smaller build plate, you can cut up the helmet into even more pieces if you need to. This is the technique that you will use to print any file on any print bed. Some of the print settings I typically use are 210 degrees for the nozzle, 60 degrees for the bed, 5 to 10% infill, 3 inner perimeter walls. That's going to give the print a lot more strength than just infill will. Plus if you have your infill really high, it makes the print take a long time and use a lot of material for not a lot of benefit. So once this helmet is fully sliced, it's going to take about 46 hours, which is pretty typical for a face. These helmets usually take at least 100 hours to fully print, so I hope you guys are prepared. Typically it takes 1 to 2 kilograms of filament, but again, that depends on your settings. You know, if you have an infill all the way up to 80%, that's going to use a lot more material than if you have it at 5. So once we've got the pieces all sliced and turned into G-code, we can use that G-code in the printers to get our prints. So now that we've got our pieces, either from you printing them yourself or from getting them from my shop, we can start assembling the helmet. Now for this, we're going to need a few things. Along with our parts, we've got a sandpaper pad glued to a flat surface, some CA glue, and some E6000. I also like to use a soldering iron that I don't really care about keeping clean anymore. So the first step in assembly, we're going to take our sandpaper pad and sand down the edges of the helmet. What this is going to do is it's going to make the edges smoother so that the parts fit closer together. It's also going to rough up the surface so that our CA glue binds a lot faster. That way we won't have to hold the helmet in place for too long while the glue sets. So here I'm just taking both edges of the helmet and rubbing them against the sandpaper pad until they feel a little bit dusty. We'll repeat this process for the face, the back, as well as the top. Now that they're pretty well sanded, we'll need to align the helmet and prepare it for gluing. So we'll take our CA glue and add just a drop about every inch along the seam of the helmet. Now this glue is going to bond pretty fast. I'm talking 30 seconds or so before you have to really try and pry it off. So we're going to have to be very careful about our alignment here. What I'll do is use my fingers along the edge to try and make sure that the pieces are flush together, and then I'll use my soldering iron to kind of weld the inside seam of the helmet to keep it in place just a little bit. It's really important that you guys get the alignment correct here. So if you feel like you're not getting it right in the first like 10 seconds or so, don't feel bad about taking it apart, resanding it, and reapplying glue. Because if this glue cures and the helmet's in the wrong position, you're gonna have a bad time. You don't really need a soldering iron here. I just use it to kind of hold the helmet in place after I've aligned the pieces. That way they don't slide around after I've already glued them. Now once I feel the pieces are pretty aligned, I might take the soldering iron and weld the entire inside seam of the helmet just for some added strength. Now as a final reinforcement, we'll take our E6000 and apply it to all the seams on the inside of the helmet. This stuff takes around 24 hours to fully cure, so that's why we're doing it last. But it's really gonna add a lot of strength to the helmet so that it doesn't fall apart on us. Now that we've got our helmet fully assembled, we will move on to smoothing it. Now the first product we're going to be using for smoothing is Bondo glazing and spot putty. This stuff is kind of like a toothpaste that once it reacts with the air, it will begin to harden over the course of 4 to 6 hours. When working with this stuff, you're going to want some gloves as well as a respirator because it kind of does smell bad. So what we're going to do is just squeeze out a bit on the helmet and then rub it in with our fingers. We want to get a full coverage with this stuff, so apply it pretty liberally. And we'll just apply it over the entire helmet. I used to use filler primer first, but I find that using Bondo first saves a lot of filler primer. You know, when doing filler primer first, it would take about 3 to 4 cans to get a fully smooth surface. But instead you can use about 1 full tube of Bondo, which you can get at the grocery store, which costs around like $5 or so. And then we'll probably only use 1 can of filler primer. So this technique is going to save you guys some material. So you can see me just working it in all the spaces of the helmet. Be sure to only apply the Bondo in spaces that you know you'll be able to sand. We don't want to apply it in any spots that are too detailed that we can't reach with some sandpaper. And be sure and apply a little bit extra along the seams of the helmet where we glued them together. Those are the spots that are going to be the most noticeable, and we want to hide those seams as best as we can. So you can see I've got about half the helmet finished. I'm going to apply the other half, and then we can start sanding. For sanding, I'm going to start with a 120 grit pad of sandpaper. This is going to make sure that we can get a lot of the Bondo sanded off. I'm just going to go around the entire helmet, sanding it all as best as I can, and making it as smooth as I can. Now this is definitely one of the most tedious parts of the whole process, so just stick with it. Your arm is definitely going to get tired, but it's all part of the fun. You're going to want to be sure and do this either outside or in a place that you can clean up pretty well, because this makes a lot of dust that just settles everywhere. You're also going to want to wear a respirator for this, for the same reason. The dust, it's going to be everywhere. You don't want to breathe that in, and the respirator will help protect your lungs. So you'll see me here just going around the entire helmet. I grab a microfiber cloth to clean off some of the dust whenever it starts to accumulate too much. I also like to use a leaf blower for this because, like I said, your arms get pretty tired, and a leaf blower does a pretty good job of cleaning off the helmet of dust. So once the helmet is completely sanded, it's still gonna be pretty rough. And that's gonna bring us into our next step, the old familiar filler primer. Now the filler primer is like a really thick spray paint. It's gonna do a great job at filling in the very tiny lines that the sandpaper scratched into the helmet. We're also gonna use this in the very detailed areas that we didn't want to put any Bondo, since as an aerosol it can get into a lot of the smaller spaces. You'll probably wanna do 1 to 2 coats of the filler primer, waiting about 20 minutes in between each coat. Once the filler primer is fully cured, we'll take a look at the helmet again and see if we missed any spots. So it's pretty likely that there's still some very minor defects in the helmet, like you can still see some print lines or a spot isn't exactly smooth, and that's perfectly normal. So what we'll do is we're going to go over the helmet with our Bondo again, but this time we're only going to do the specific spots that still need a little work. This means we're also going to have to do another round of sanding. This time we're still going to be using the 120 grit sandpaper pad, but we'll be moving up to higher grits after this. Just to make sure our helmet is perfectly smooth before the final sanding, I went ahead and added another layer of filler primer. So for the final round of sanding, I went up to a 240 grit pad of sandpaper. You can go higher than this. I've done 300 in the past, I've done 400, but I feel like 240 is pretty good for what we're doing here. Now since this is the final round of sanding, you want to closely inspect the helmet, make sure that you feel like it's ready for painting. All of the seams from the pieces being glued together should not be visible. There shouldn't be very many visible layer lines or horizontal lines of any kind, but if there are, it's not a problem. Just add more Bondo, add more filler primer, and do some more sanding. Once you feel like the helmet is physically perfect, we can begin painting. So for the paint, I'm going to be going with a Rust-Oleum flat black. Now when doing the base coat, it's important to remember that you don't have to get all of the color in one shot. You can do 2 or 3 layers of paint. With rattle cans, if you spray too much, you're going to get some runs and it just doesn't look great. So be sure and take your time, be patient. You don't have to get it all in one shot. Also, don't ask why the helmet is suddenly white. I just completely forgot that every part of this helmet is either orange or black. There is no actual white in this helmet at all. So if you're going to be doing more than one coat, be sure and let it dry for at least 20 minutes in between coats. Once you've got a good base color of black all the way around the helmet, we're going to move on to taping the helmet in preparation for the orange. So the taping for this helmet was probably one of the most complicated designs that I've done. Not nearly as bad as Commander Wolf, but it was still pretty complicated. So what I've done is I've loaded up Battlefront 2 just to get a good, reference image so that I can replicate the design in the tape. Now for the tape, I've got the thin, kind of white masking tape for the more intricate designs, and we're going to be using the thicker blue tape just to protect the rest of the helmet so that we don't accidentally paint something orange. Now this process takes a long time and is pretty tedious, but the better job you do here, the better your helmet is going to look. If we rush this, the paint job might look weird, and trust me, the paint job is something you want to get perfect. So you're going to see me tape something, untape it, and retape it probably 3 or 4 times. I've also got the X-Acto knife with me to make very precision cuts in the tape. Also, you can sketch out the design with a pencil if you're not quite sure what you want to do with it. Now it's important to keep in the frame of mind that we're taping off the things that we want to remain black. We're not taping where we want orange to be. I know I've done it a few times where I've accidentally taped over the wrong area, or in my mind I'm thinking that I'm taping over the orange areas when you're not. You're taping over the areas that you want to stay black, because when we're done, we're just going to take the orange spray paint and just spray it on the face so that when we peel off the tape, those areas underneath will remain black. And you're going to want to make sure that your tape has a good connection to the helmet. If the tape is wrinkled or ruffled or not sticky enough, it might come up from the helmet. And in that case, when we go to paint it, paint is going to seep underneath that and mess up our design so that we don't have straight lines. Obviously, we want to avoid that if we can. So just rub your finger over the edge of the tape and make sure that it's stuck very well to the helmet. There's not a lot to say about this step. Just take your time. Don't be afraid to restart if you're not happy with how it's looking. So once we've got the helmet finally taped up, we're going to go outside and do some painting. So for the orange, we're actually going to be using the same orange that I used in my Captain Vaughn video. So be sure and check that out if you haven't already. It's going to be a Rust-Oleum Satin Rustic Orange. Now when painting, again, you just want to be sure to do light coats. For this helmet, I did 2 coats of orange paint, and be sure and wait about 20 minutes in between coats. Once that's done, we can do one of my favorite parts of this whole build and remove the tape to reveal our design underneath. Once we've let the paint dry for about a day, we can start to peel off the tape. Now for this, you don't want to be too aggressive and peel it off too hard. We don't want to accidentally peel up any of the black paint underneath. You also want to try to avoid using your fingernail or scratching anything too hard. For this, I like to use the tip of my X-Acto knife to gently lift up a corner of the tape for me to peel off the rest. Now, the brim above the eyes of this helmet is actually black, so we'll need to do some more taping for that and then paint it black. This tape job is pretty simple. Just use our masking tape to get the edge of the brim, and we're also going to paint the teeth of the helmet black as well. So just use your small masking tape to define the details, and then use the larger blue tape to protect the rest of the face from the black paint. Just use the same flat black that we used before for the brim and the teeth, and we'll be good. Now that we've got the teeth and the brim painted black, we've got the exact design of the helmet fully painted. For the next step, we're going to be gluing on the accessories. Now I've been sanding and painting the accessories just off to the side without filming because they're pretty simple. They're all just solid black. This helmet has a lot of black. but they follow the same principles: Bondo, filler primer, sand. Now to glue the accessories onto the helmet, we're going to be using our E6000 from before. Now this glue takes over a day to fully cure, so in order for the pieces not to slip or accidentally fall off in that time, we're going to be taping them to the helmet. The tape is going to help support them and keep them in place while the glue sets. The nice thing about this glue is that it is very, very strong when fully cured. So it should be able to hold the antenna, the mouthpieces, the center mouthpiece, and the ear piece pretty well. So once you have all the accessories taped in place, let it sit for at least a day, and then we'll come back to reveal our nearly finished helmet. Now once we take this tape off the helmet, it's really going to start coming together. We've got just a few more things to do. One, we need some kind of backing behind the teeth. For this, I'm going to be using mosquito netting layered over itself 4 times. What this is going to do is it's going to give us the really good mesh look that's required by most 501st CRLs, and it's also going to prevent people from being able to look inside your helmet through the teeth holes to see your face. So I got this mosquito netting just from Walmart. It was only like $1. So I don't feel too bad cutting it up. So just grab some scissors. We're going to cut out a very tall length of mosquito net so that we can layer it over itself 3 or 4 times. Now the layering is kind of necessary because just by itself with one layer, you could still see through it pretty well. But if you lay it over itself 3 or 4 times, it becomes a lot thicker while still having the mesh texture. To glue it in, we're just going to be using a hot glue gun. It's pretty simple. We're going to lay down the layered mosquito netting over the mouth and then just use our hot glue gun to glue it down. It is mosquito netting, so the glue will just seep through all the layers and should stick to the base of the helmet. You might have to use your fingers to kind of press down the glue to make sure that it goes all the way through the net, but this is a pretty simple process. If we get an up close look, you can see that it's got a nice mesh texture in between the teeth. That's really the look that we want. Now next, we're gonna need a visor. Otherwise, you look pretty dumb with your eyes poking through. For this, we're going to be using a grinding shield. Now face shields are in pretty short supply now, but if you look up on Amazon, grinding shield, face shield, you should be able to find maybe something. We're going to be using the leftover face shield from the Captain Vaughn. I'm going to have to orient it a little bit differently. Here we've got to tilt it on its side so we can get the length all the way across the visor. So we're just going to cut out the basic shape with some scissors and then see how that fits on the inside of the helmet. Now to hold the visor in place, we're going to be using a 2-part epoxy putty. Now stuff comes in a tube. It's got a gray exterior and a black interior. Now when you mix these two, they chemically react and begin an exothermic reaction, so they get hot. But while doing that, it also hardens very quickly. I'm talking like 15 minutes or so. So we're going to stick 2 little globs of epoxy putty in the 2 corners of the visor, and we're going to hold them down in place just for a few minutes until they start to harden. Then we'll repeat the process, doing it in the bottom 2 corners. This is really going to hold the visor in place very well. When this stuff fully hardens, it hardens to like stone. So the visor won't be going anywhere. For the final part of the helmet, we're going to be doing a little bit of weathering. And for that, we're going to be using an airbrush. In the airbrush, we're going to have some black paint. And then what we're going to do is very gently apply a light coating of black in the crevices of the helmet, and then just a little dusting around the entire orange design. Obviously this helmet is already mostly black, so this is kind of a short process for this helmet. We're going to focus on adding black into the kind of the corners and seams of the helmet where dirt and grime would naturally accumulate. This is going to give it a very nice lived in feeling and just give some reality to the helmet. When weathering, generally less is more, so hold yourself back from going overboard and applying too much black everywhere. But this is also the stage where you can express yourself. If you really want a damaged helmet, one that's like supposed to be 100 years old, then yeah, you would go a little bit overboard. But if you're just wanting a regular helmet that's supposed to be present day, just a light touch will do it. You also don't have to do any weathering. Say if you wanted a shiny, something that was fresh off Camino, you'd probably just want the helmet to be done there. In that case, the helmet would be brand new, fresh, so it would have no weathering. So it's kind of up to you what you want the helmet to look like. But now that we're done with weathering, we have ourselves a completed Umbra ARC Trooper. I had a lot of fun with this project. I really loved how Battlefront 2 ended up turning around, becoming a great game with some great clone troopers. I'm very sad to see support ending for Battlefront 2, but I am excited for the future of Star Wars. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and I hope you feel confident enough to take on a project like this yourself. it really is very rewarding to make a clone trooper helmet like this. This was always one of my dreams growing up as a kid, to have the actual armor from the movies. So I hope you're the same way. The great thing about clones is that there is almost an unlimited variety of designs you could do. You could do any of them from canon, which is probably at least dozens, or you could make up your own and make it something unique. So if you're interested in this, I hope you give it a shot yourself. I've got a lot more helmet tutorials on the way, so be sure to be looking out for those. Until then, I hope to see you guys again in the next video.